The following program was made possible by the generosity of those who have determined to hold fast to the true Roman Catholic religion, as expounded by the Roman Catholic Church before the disasters of Vatican II and the so-called New Mass. If you would like this program to continue, please be ready to pledge financial support when you are asked later in the program.
To avoid ending up like this? I mean, I understand, or at least I think it's somewhat still rare.
Yeah, well, probably not as rare as one might think. Remember, the devil does try to conceal himself. But I tend to think it is on the rise. Father Amorth says it. Father Amorth, the head exorcist in Rome, says that the diabolical power in the world is growing and growing. And he talks about the malicious dictators, the murderous dictators of the middle of the last century. And he believes he said they showed clear sign of possession. Hitler, Stalin, Mao. He names them. And he says these men were possessed by the devil. Something that Father Amorth warns about is the growing power of the devil because he's not being resisted by those who do have that power or should have that power. And the Novus Ordo, the new religion that came out of Vatican II, basically abdicated. Well, in the movie, for example, you have two forces that are present in the movie that are trying to prevent the priest, Father Moore, from telling the story. The devil is trying to intimidate him into silence, that he will not tell the story of Annalise or Emily Rose. The devil is tormenting the defense attorney, who herself was an agnostic in the movie, so that she will not allow Father Rose to testify. So the devil is in the movie as trying to silence Father Moore from telling the story. The other entity in the movie that is also together with the devil, I mean, working tandem with the devil, to silence Father Moore and prevent him from telling the story is the archdiocese. And they are trying to work through the attorneys there to keep him off the stand, to get him to accept a plea bargain, because they don't want to be embarrassed by all this talk about the supernatural and the devil and exorcisms and so on. It's like they're embarrassed about the whole thing. So they're desperate to silence him. So you have these two dark forces kind of just off screen. The devil on the one hand and the archdiocese on the other hand, who are working toward the same goal to squelch this story. It's a very interesting movie. I wouldn't recommend it to somebody who's faint of heart, because there's some very realistic scenes, about the devil's parlor tricks. But they're very impressive to us because they're rather gruesome. But they're just parlor tricks for him. That's all he can muster. Father Amorth says the worst thing he can do to you is not possess you or obsess you or oppress you. The worst thing he can do to you is tempt you. Because when he's tempting you, he's inviting you to join him in his guilt. And ultimately, he's inviting you to join him in hell. And he can't do that to you by obsessing you or possessing you or oppressing you here on earth, but by tempting you. He can only do that by getting you to voluntarily, willingly join him in his rebellion against God, in his guilt, and condemn yourself. That's why Father Amorth says we might be very impressed by these other things because they're grotesque and they make us suffer here. He says, but don't have any doubts about it. The worst thing he does to any human being is to tempt them to sin, because that will put them in hell.
Welcome to What Catholics Believe. I'm your host, Jim Erling. The topic of today's show is continuing discussion of exorcisms. With me to discuss this is Father William Jenkins of Immaculate Conception Church, where only the traditional Latin Mass is offered. Father, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jim. Good to be with you.
Father, getting back to our discussion on the issue of exorcisms, and specifically the reason for the topic is the recent movie, The Exorcism of Emily Rose. One question that I want to ask, and we alluded to it earlier, but I want to get back into a little more detail, is the fidelity of the movie to the rituals that were contained in the film and the actual rituals that the Church prescribes for exorcisms. Were those two reconcilable? Or?
As much as was shown, yes, I believe they were very faithful. You see, in the old Rituale, chapter 11, contained the prayers of exorcism. And before the prayers themselves began in the rituale, there were 21 instructions to exorcists, what they must do, what they must not do. And what Father Moore, who was the priest in the movie, he was played by a man named Tom Wilkinson, who did a very, very fine job, I think. What he did in that movie was according to what those commands required of him. For example, one of the first things the exorcist is told to do, never enter into discussions with the devil, and never answer his questions, because he will just try to get you off track, and if he gets you responding to him, then he is exercising power over you. So you must never do that. You don't respond to him, you are there to command him. So that's like the first principle. And the first thing you command him to do after he manifests himself, you've forced him to manifest himself, is to reveal his name. And that was exactly what this priest, Father Moore, did in the movie. And I'm sure the priests who exorcised Annalise, back in the early 1970s, followed those, instructions of the rituale to the letter. And you notice when you see the movie, you see that Father Moore is insisting that the demons must reveal their names. And no matter what the devil does to throw him off the track, to distract him, he insists, he asks that, he's pounding that same question over and over again. What is your name? What is your name? And somebody who sees the movie might think, well, why? What's he doing? Why is he doing this? All these terrible things are going on, things flying through the air and so on. And he's insisting, tell me your name. And the devil keeps repeating, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And Father Moore then realizes he's saying, there are 6 of them there. And he insists, tell me who you are, tell me your name. And the reason for this, the reason why the ritual, the reason why the church instructs the exorcist to do this, is because when the priest compels the devil to answer and to reveal his identity, that again is establishing that that exorcist has power to command the devil, because the devil does not want to reveal that, and he has to be compelled to reveal it. And when the list finally comes out, when the devil actually has to succumb to the authority of the exorcist in the movie, it is again very realistic. The voices reveal who are the demons who possessed this person, the demons who possessed that person. One of them, even the demon who possessed Judas Iscariot, is there. And all 6 of them are named. And it's kind of a curious gathering of devils, and it's a very, let's say we would consider these to be some of the most hideous devils in history, ranging from a disgraced priest of the previous century, that is previous to the exorcisms, whom you and I would never have heard of as one of the devils, all the way to this devil who possessed Judas Iscariot, the night of the Last Supper when the devil entered into him. That was just after he took the Blessed Sacrament from our Lord's own hands and received it at the Last Supper. His malice was complete. He was determined to betray our Lord. The Gospel tells us that the devil entered in. And according to this, this was at least one of those spirits that entered into him. Now, I think that was the case in the actual exorcism of Annalise, the real subject of these exorcisms back in the 1970s. I think that the devil did reveal that on that occasion, that was one of the spirits that was there. So, Father Moore, the movie priest, actually followed very exactly, insofar as you saw him in action during the exorcism, what was demanded by the church of an exorcism.
You mentioned that the exorcist was at one point, anyways, a minor order within the orders that are given a priest. However, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe this isn't the case today, I don't know, but the diocese, or there was a priest that was designated an exorcist who actually went about
and
this.
Usually more than one.
Yeah. And how was that determined? Or
the bishop of the diocese would designate one of the priests or more most often, I believe, I could be wrong in this, but I know in some cases anyway, the identity of the exorcist or exorcists was secret. They were not revealed to the other, even to the other priests in the diocese necessarily. These are our exorcists, you know. That might not have been true in all dioceses, but it was true in some. And the bishop would choose a priest, obviously, at least we would hope, on the basis of his holiness of life, and also his tenacity of spirit, because in a sense he has to be more determined than the devil himself, more determined to rescue the person than the devil is to hold on. Now, you know, the movie The Exorcist was a horror show. That came out just after I graduated from high school. And I know adults, married adults, who were sleeping in the same room, husband and wife, and they had to sleep with the light on for a week or two after they saw the movie The Exorcist. It terrified them. It was a horror show. The Exorcism of Emily Rose is not a horror show. The hideous things that are portrayed in the movie are not portrayed for the sake of scaring a person half to death. They are actually setting up for a spiritual message here of what was happening, what was actually going on between, as it were, heaven and hell, you know, in the soul of this young woman, Annalise, or Emily Rose, and even in the priest, and to some extent even in the soul of the agnostic defense attorney, who was a woman. So, you know, if one is faint of heart, I wouldn't necessarily recommend seeing this movie, and if one is under the age of 18, in any case, I would recommend a parent see the movie first and decide whether or not, you know, anybody under that age level should see it, because I know people who got nightmares from seeing this movie. They said it was a good movie. They really thought it had a very powerful spiritual message, but it scared them anyway. And you know what? I asked one of the boys, one of the older teenage boys I know who saw the movie, who's a really good boy and has a very strong, solid spiritual life and a certain love for our Lord. And I asked him, why were you so terrified of this movie? It gave him nightmares? He never had those before. At least not like that. And he said, because it was so real. Because it wasn't just a horror show. You realize that there is a devil, and he can and does do things like that. And he said, because it was so real, that's why it was so frightening to him. But, you know, he's the type, as most people would be, who have a strong spiritual foundation, who would actually get the spiritual message out of the movie, and that would make much more of an impression on them than the gruesome things they're seeing. The priest played, Tom Wilkinson played the part very well.
What about the other actors and actresses in the film?
I thought the defense attorney, the woman, I forget her name now, but I thought she did a very good job. You know, there was one moment in the movie that I thought was very powerful, and it just was so quick. Father Moore is on the stand. Basically, the movie starts with the death of the girl. You know, they don't show... The coroner is going into the room where the girl died, and that's how the movie starts, to certify that she died, and then they take Father Moore away. He's charged with negligent homicide or something. And basically the story of Emily Rose occurs in the retelling. The priest is basically telling the defense attorney what happened, you know. The priest is on the stand testifying under oath what happened. There are those who are desperately trying to silence him, the devil, the archdiocese, and so on. And the agnostic prosecutor, or defense attorney, who's on his side, is the one who risks her job to give him the forum to say what he has to say, to tell the story, even though she's afraid that this is going to spell his conviction. And, you know, but she actually knows that he's got to tell the story. He convinces her he has to do that. And he's absolutely convinced. She sees his conviction, and that moves her. It's very interesting, even from that point of view. The impact of this report of the supernatural on the various souls. The prosecuting attorney is a devout Methodist, but he is on the attack against this whole idea. And you can see it's a personal thing with him. So you have the defense attorney who's an agnostic, who's trying to let Father Moore tell the story of the exorcism, even though she doesn't know what to believe. And things are happening to her, too, that are enough to give you a nightmare, too. And but she's so agnostic, it's like she doesn't quite get it yet. But you can see the wheels are beginning to turn now. You know, she's beginning to wonder if there's something to this. And then the Christian, the Methodist prosecuting attorney is going after this and trying to debunk the whole thing and make it out to be nonsense. And just a story made up to defend the priest, cover his tracks for what he did. But there's one moment that I think is so, I don't know, it's just like a powerful moment. Father Moore is on the stand. The prosecution is bringing up these medical witnesses about this girl's condition. And their point is, she should have been allowed to take the course of medication and treatment that we prescribe for her, and she would be alive today. And she is dead because Father Moore took her off that and sent her on the spiritual track of exorcism, and that's what happened to her. That's why she's dead. And it's his fault, you know. And so she's casting about, trying to find some medical authority on the subject. Well, she finds some sort of voodoo person, I think, you know. Then it comes to light. Somebody contacts her. A doctor who was present for the exorcisms. Father Moore hadn't said a word about him. A fairly well-established and respectable psychiatrist. So she contacts the doctor. The doctor knows what's going on, so he contacts her and says, I know what happened, I saw it, and yes, I do have the medical credentials. And so they get together, but you can see he's really scared because he saw this. And later on in the movie, you see what he saw because Father Moore gets to explain what happened there. But this medical doctor tells her, I was there, I saw the whole thing, I can testify for Father Moore. And the defense attorney is thinking, why didn't Father Moore tell me this? And so the next scene switches to her accosting Father Moore and saying to him, you had a reliable, what do you call it, a respected medical person who was willing to come on the stand and testify in your defense, and you wouldn't even tell me about that. Why didn't you tell me? And Father Moore's answer was, he asked me not to. And that was it. And she just looked at him like, as though, oh. Because it was the last thing she expected. But this was a priest who had been asked by someone, please keep this confidential. And so as far as he was concerned, I mean, even if the whole case and his whole defense depended on that, he wasn't going to break that confidence. And I thought that moment was very well done, you know, and very impressive. And I think it kind of would impress anybody who takes some credence, puts credence in it, to say, well, you know, priests do have to keep confidential many, 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 many things. That they would die before they would reveal, even if it meant defending themselves, you know, against a charge of negligent homicide, maybe 10 years in prison.
One can only imagine what the impression that would have made then on the agnostic defense attorney for that.
Well, you could tell she developed a real respect for him in the course of the movie. So I thought it was very well done from that point of view too. I thought it was very realistically portrayed and very accurately portrayed. Whether it would have an effect, you know, when the movie's over, you know, I won't give away the judgment of the jury. Okay. One of the few things I guess I'm not giving away. I'm not giving away also the spiritual ending, you know, about the meaning, the explanation of it all. But everyone is sort of left hanging there with that unresolved question, was this real or was it not? Was it just some extraordinary and extravagant medical condition that could have been treated medically, effectively? And did the girl die because Father Moore led her away from that into spiritual means? That's something that is kind of left unresolved, even in the mind of the defense attorney. even in spite of the experiences. I'll tell you one thing, though. By the time people walk out of that theater, I think they're wondering what's going to be going through their minds when the clock strikes 3 a.m. because there's something in the movie that attaches significance to that.
Okay.
And maybe people, are curious, could go and find out what that is.
Right, exactly. You alluded earlier about some of the changes that affected by the modern church in the actual ritual of exorcism itself. And one would think that it would be in the devil's best interest to render these rituals as ineffective as possible. And isn't it true that that's exactly what happened just as of a few years ago, that there were some changes that were implemented?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that after Vatican II, the modernists neglected to change that Chapter 11 of the old Rituale because they figured no one would bother with it anymore. So it would just basically go the way of like oblivion. But they found out it didn't, because the devil's resurgence in power followed immediately on that basically laying down of arms by the modernist church after Vatican II. As I mentioned in the last program, Paul VI did away with the exorcisms at baptism. Took the prayer to St. Michael the Archangel at the end. He did away with the prayers after Low Mass, and among them was the prayer to St. Michael the Archangel. There were a lot of concessions, let's say, to the devil, and the devil took full advantage of them. And now even the Novus Ordo Church is getting a little scared about what's going on around it, and rightly so. And Father Amorth actually led the charge. He said, look, we've got to get more serious about this. We're not opposing the devil's power as we must be. That's why he is growing in power, because there's a vacuum there. We're not there resisting him. The Catholic Church is the force that must resist him. The Catholic Church has the power to resist him. And but then the attention that Father Amorth brought to this precipitated something that maybe he didn't really want, and that is the Vatican rewriting the ceremonies of exorcism and rewriting the prayers. And Father Amorth has come out since then, such as in the last 2 years, that is. And he said the new rite of exorcism is essentially useless. He said, if I had to use this, I might as well give up.
Amazing.
It is amazing that he would go on record as saying that. There are things that he says in his book, An Exorcist Tells His Story, that make you wonder, boy, how forthright he is, how bold he is. Even what he says about bishops calling him from around the world, saying, can you come and exorcise someone in my diocese? And Father Amorth saying to them, well, you have priests, have them do it. And he says, well, I don't have any priests who would do it, even if they believed in it. And Father Amorth would say to the bishop, well, you're the bishop, you do it. And the bishops answer him, well, I wouldn't know where to begin.
Amazing.
And so, and you ask yourself, how could this man be so forthright in saying this about bishops? And I think the answer is, this is a man who's accustomed to go toe-to-toe with the devil himself. And so he's certainly not going to be afraid of a modernist bishop here or there. So he does have a certain awareness of how the Church has abdicated since Vatican II in this role. But, I don't know if Father Amorth sees the problem as a traditional Catholic sees it. It's not just the rite of exorcism. The devil has the right, has the will to sort of disarm the Mass, do away with the Mass, substitute the true Mass with something else. And that's what he's done with this new Mass. This new Mass never claims to be the sacrifice of Calvary. One might say, oh, but wait a minute, Father Jenkins, you're going too far. Because in the instruction on the new Mass, like the user's manual that comes with it, it does talk about, the sacrifice of Calvary and so on. But that has no practical bearing on the actual new Mass. The new Mass is what it is. And I can write or say anything about it that I want to. It doesn't change the new Mass from being what it is. And the fact is, the new Mass never claims to be the sacrifice of Calvary. And that's exactly what the devil wants. He wants a worship service that does away with the sacrifice of Calvary in the world today. The traditional Mass is that sacrifice of Calvary, which undid his kingdom and wrenches souls from his power. And he knows that, and that's why he targeted the Mass, and that's why he targeted the priesthood. The very first sacrament that the modernists changed after Vatican II was the ordination of priests and bishops. And the devil wanted to get right down to brass tacks there. First, the ordination of priests, the consecration of bishops. Take care of that. Wipe that out. Mm-hmm. Then the Mass. Take care of that. Wipe that out. Take that off the table. And then one thing after another. You see the order that he followed. The sacrament of confirmation fell very quickly. And you could see why he would want to do away with that and substitute something totally innocuous toward him in place of that. And this is all the modernist theology that has, erupted since Vatican II. And the devil could not ask for more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, they are indeed frightening times, and it appears that evil is on the rise, but our Lord has promised that where evil abounds, grace does that much more abound.
That's right, Jim.
So
I think this movie actually has that message,
mm-hmm.
that even at the worst, the devil cannot do anything. And really, effectively, God has the power. And he even uses the devil's malice to sanctify us and save our souls.
So that message of hope is there.
It's there, very powerful.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Father, for joining us and explaining this to us and giving us your insights on the topic.
Certainly, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Please join us next week on What Catholics Believe. Thank you.